Are we going to have a little discussion
Good
on the?
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a live session of GETI Talks. I have a very special guest from all the way from Kabul, Mr. Hamidullah Rafi. He is the co-founder and president of Rahila Foundation in Kabul. Well, before I, tell what is the topic that he's going to talk about, the topic will be very evident if I tell you the story of this foundation. But before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Shilpi. I'm the relationship manager with the Global Education and Training Institute. Rahila Foundation is actually a foundation which Mr. Hamidullah founded, thought of, making this organization as he had a sister, younger sister, I believe, Mr. Hamid. She was your younger sister, Rahila. I think there's a network issue. So yes, Rahila, his 17-year-old sister, and she was sitting in a classroom with other high school students, and then there, was a suicide attack, and Rahila, along with the classmates, was killed in this attack. And this is not new, which is happening in Afghanistan, as I had a discussion with Mr. Hamid. This is something, a day to day scenario. And he believes that preventing violent extremism can only happen through education. Yes, of course, education enlightens minds. Education brings you closer to the world outside. You are just not in a narrow minded, you are not thinking in a certain pattern. It opens you to philosophies and to cultures around the world. And that is what he's going to talk about. But Hamid, I would like you to talk a little about your sister, and then we can come to this topic. And whenever you can ask me to add the PPT, I'll add it on the screen. Thank you so much.
Hello,
Mr. Hamid, I can
Miss
hear you.
Shilpi. I think I don't have your voice. Hello.
We can hear you. We can hear you. We can hear you.
Good. Great, great. Thank you so much, Mr. P. And thank you so much, everyone, from the GETI. Thank you for arranging and organizing this beautiful session. Today, we will be talking on the preventing of violent extremism through education and how education can prevent violent extremism internationally. As we know that violent extremism has become a serious threat facing societies across the world. It affects the security, well-being, and dignity of many individuals living in both developed and developing countries, as well as their peaceful and sustainable ways of life. It is also poses grave challenges to human rights. To date, the challenges presented by violent extremism have been evaluated primarily through military and security lenses. From 2001 up to 2017, the United States government alone will have spent approximately 1.78 trillion US dollar to fight terrorism. The European Union's spending is estimated to have increased from 5.7 million euro in 2002 to 93.5 million euro in 2009. So the governments are increasingly aware that allocating funds to reinforce security measures is insufficient to protect everyone from terrorist attacks perpetrated by violent extremism individuals. In the face of such threats, there is no single solution. Security responses are important, but not sufficient, and will not tackle the many underlying conditions that breed violent extremism and drive youth to join violent extremism groups. Uh, Efforts to prevent violent extremism must be considered within a holistic framework. We need soft power, such as education. In particular, we need relevant, inclusive, and equitable quality education. Since 2015, the importance of education has been increasingly recognized in the context of international efforts to prevent violent extremism. Education has a powerful role to play in long-term prevention of violent extremism by equipping learners with the right skill and competencies, increasing employment opportunities, and empowering youth. In this webinar, we will address all the actors and stakeholders working in education, namely policymakers, planners, curriculum developers, trainers, school heads, teachers, counselors, and school management boards. If we come to preventing violent extremism through education, what is preventing violent extremism through education? It is consists of building learners' resilience to violence, extremism, and making sure that educational environments do not become a breeding ground for radicalization. In practice, uh, preventing violent extremism through education programs consist in strengthening the capacities of national education systems through the development of policies, educational content like curricula, teachers' competencies, and teaching methodologies, as well as learning environments and strategic communications, so that they are able to build a safe environment as part of national prevention efforts. If you go to next slide, let's have a little bit talking about the key concepts. The terminology surrounding violent extremism is complex and still largely debated. This is due to a variety of reasons, chief among them the fact that many terms used in this field do not have universally accepted definitions. As underlying in the UN Secretary General's Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism, definitions of terrorism and violent extremism are not straightforward. Defining these terms is prerogative of member states, even if such definition must be consistent with country obligations under international law and, in particular, human rights law. In this context, the United Nations General Assembly decided to take a practical approach to the matter, which consists in not seeking to provide a definition of these terms. Instead, it adopted by consensus the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy, which provides a common strategy and operational approach to counterterrorism. Similarly, the UNSG's Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism intends to pursue a practical approach to preventing violent extremism without seeking to address questions of definition. Another reasons why discussions on terminology are complex in international context is because of the challenges linked to translation. Undeniably, when translated, these terms can take on new or new meanings that increase the potential for cross-cultural misunderstandings. So furthermore, professionals working on the prevention of violent extremism for different sectors of society and context may also be using similar words to designate different realities, which introduces another layer of sophistication to discussion on violent extremism. Because there is no consensus on definition, it is recommended these notions be discussed and defined at the national level as a precondition to any planning efforts in order to fully understand the multiple implications of each term. If you go to extremism, what is the meaning of extremism? Literally, extremism means the belief and the support of ideas that are very far from what most people consider correct or reasonable. Extremism thus refers to attitudes or behaviors that are deemed outside the norm. This basic dictionary understanding highlights the inherently subjective nature of the term, which can take on different meaning depending on who defines the norm and decides what is acceptable or not accordingly. The next term is violent extremism. What is violent extremism? There is no internationally agreed upon definition of violent extremism yet. The most common understanding of term, which is applied in our today's session, is that it refers to the beliefs and actions of people who support or use violence to achieve ideological, religious, or political goals. This includes terrorism and other forms of politically motivated and sectarian violence. Typically, violent extremism also identifies an enemy or enemies who are the object of hatred and violence. The conceptual core of violent extremism is that it is an ideologically motivated resort to the use of violence, commonly based on the conspiracy theories. To the next slide, if we go, we have the definition of terrorism. What is terrorism? Terrorism refers to a particular strategy adopted to achieve a political goal, which is singularly the deliberate creation and exploitation of fear. In a landmark UN General Assembly resolution also have planned the countries strongly and unambiguously condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, committed by whomever, wherever, and for whatever purpose, as it constituted on one of the most serious threats to international peace and security. It is limited rather to addressing the ideologically motivated use of violence. The terms violent extremism and terrorism are often mistakenly used interchangeably. While terrorism is a form of violent extremism, and terrorism is also often motivated ideologically, the conceptual and underpinning of terrorism that distinguishes it from violent extremism is the creation of fear or terror as a means to an end. The next term that we have is the radicalization. What does the radicalization means? As with the term extremism, the term radicalization is highly debated when used in the context of violent extremism. The concern is that the use of the term may serve to justify limitations to the freedom of speech. Indeed, radical can be defined in varying ways depending on circumstance. In certain contexts, it can simply mean wanting to cause political change. In the context of efforts to prevent violent extremism, radicalization is commonly used to describe the process by which a person adopts extreme view or practice to the point of legitimizing the use of violence. The keynote is the notion, or the key notion here is the process of embracing violence. If one wishes to point to the process by which one becomes a violent extremist, the expression radicalization leading to violence will be more appropriate than violent extremism, which focuses on the ideologically motivated resort to violence. And the next term that we have is about the resilience. Resilience generally refers to an individual's capacity to overcome challenges that has a negative impact on their emotional and physical well-being. In the context of violent extremism, resilience refers to the ability to resist or not to adhere to views and opinions that portray the world in the exclusive threats, which legitimize hatred and the use of violence. In education, this implies developing students' capacity to think critically, to learn by inquiry-based learning, we can say for that, and to verify facts so that they do not fall prey to the simplistic and one-dimensional views of the world propagated by violent extremism groups. Building resilience among students and youth is one of the key measures that can be implemented by the education sector to prevent the spread of violent extremism. About the if we talk about the drivers of the violent extremism, the root of violent extremism and causes of radicalization that lead to violence are diverse and multi-layered. There is no single sign that indicates with any degree of certainty that a person is at risk. Conventionally, the drivers of violent extremism are different in two categories: the push and the pull factors. The push factors refer to conditions that are conducive to violent extremism. They are the broader process in broader process that can push individuals toward violent extremism group. Pull factors are understood as individual motivations that attract potential recruits and the rationalists that may be used to legitimize violence. These factors are itemized here in this slide to help policymakers, especially, to understand the personal journeys of radicalization that can lead an individual to commit a violent act. The listing does not imply that each factor taken in isolation is a necessary signal of radicalization leading to violent extremism. For example, while poverty can contribute in certain instances to push individuals to join violent extremism movement, it should not be considered a necessary or the sole cause. The intention behind establishing this indicative list of factors, which is made ready by the UN and UNESCO, is to convey the message that a combination of push and pull factors can help to explain how individual motivations, personal encounters, and choices within a given context that is conducive to violent extremism can be cause for concern. Drivers of violent extremism, if we come to the pull factors or the individual motivations, are four. Maybe it's more than that, but we have here, we will talk on the four factors, especially the pull factors. Number one is the individual backgrounds or existential and spiritual search for identity and purpose, utopian world vision, or boredom, adolescent crisis, sense of mission and heroism, a promise of adventure and power attracting of violence. The next factor is identification with collective grievance and narratives of victimization that provoke powerful emotional reaction, which can be manipulated by charismatic leaders. The third factor is distortion and misuse of beliefs, political ideologies, and ethnic and cultural differences. The attraction of simple worldview, the divide the world into us vs them, or etc. The fourth factor is about the attraction of charismatic leadership and social communities and networks. For example, charismatic recruiter providing access to power and money, a sense of belonging to a powerful group or community. These were all about the pull factors. If you talk about the push factors, what are push factors are the conditions that are conducive. Number one, the factor is lack of socioeconomic opportunities like poverty, like unemployment, and like corruption, etc. The next factor is marginalization, injustice, and indiscrimination, including experience of exclusion and injustice, stigmatization, or humiliation. The third factor is about the poor governance, violations of human rights and the rule of law, a lack of experience in or exposure to process of dialogue and debate, a culture of impunity for unlawful behavior, violations of international human rights law committed in the name of state security, lack of means to make violence or to make voice heard or vent frustration. The next factor or the final factor for push factors are the prolonged and unresolved conflicts, radicalization process in prisons, leading to the legitimization of violence. If we come to the next slide about the role of education, so we have discussed about the factors that can lead an individual or a group of people to violent extremism. Uh, so, what can be achieved by education? By education, education actually cannot prevent an individual from committing a violent act in the name of a violent extremist ideology, but the provision of relevant education of good quality can help create the conditions that make it difficult for violent extremist ideologies and act to to proliferate. More specifically, education policies can ensure that places of learning do not become a breeding ground for violent extremism. Uh, they can also ensure that educational content and teaching or learning approach develop learners' resilience to violent extremism. The role of education is therefore not to interpret violent extremism or identify individuals who may potentially become violent extremists, but to create the conditions that build the defenses within learners against violent extremism and strengthen their commitment to non-violence and peace. Uh, what is the effectiveness? Education alone can have only a limited impact on the prevention of violent extremism. If it reinforces exclusionary worldviews and tolerate violence in any form, for effective impact, education policies and practices must directly and indirectly address the specific drivers of violent extremism. Businesses, as usual, will not do nor will one-off solutions. A mix of short, medium, and long-term educational measure is needed. Chief among these measures is the implementation of uh, inclusive and equitable education policies and practices that see individual differences not as a problem to be fixed, but as opportunities for enriching learning. At pedagogical level, this means prioritizing not only cognitive skills, but also learners' socio-emotional and behavioral skills in view of fostering respect for diversity and responsible engagement. Uh, when schools do not provide students with relevant learning, including the tool and opportunities to determine their future and learn about sensitive issues related to local and global conflict and tension, students are mostly likely to seek answers from less reliable sources of information, which may be manipulated by violent extremism recruiters. Uh, Lastly, education has an important role to play in disengagement, rehabilitation, and reintegration programs. Uh, If you come to the approach to tackle about violent extremism through education, uh, we have the problems in the world. So how can education especially can be a pathway to solve all these problems? One size does not fit at all. So depending on each country's capacity, institutional, financial, and human, it is political commitment to prevention efforts and its vulnerability to violent extremism. Different types of prevention activities can be implemented. In today's session, so we will talk about the approach that each country or education system is at a different stage of preparedness in this regard. Consequently, implementation agendas will vary among countries. It is important to underline that there is no single approach to the prevention of violent extremism through education. The scope and nature of violent extremism and their respective push and pull factors are not the same everywhere and at all times. Neither are the strengths and weakness of national education system when it comes to responding to the challenges of violent extremism. Conduction and objective assessment of the situation in a country helps avoid the risk of building on wrong assumptions, which can undermine the effectiveness of future policies and programs. The first approach is about the conducting a situation analysis. Uh, Prevention policies should be based on the sound situational analysis. In the below, we have examples. I will give you the examples of questions to be answered before developing policies, as you see the questions in the slide. That question, one of that question is, well, what are the current manifestation and prevalence of violent extremism in the country? Who are the most at-risk groups? What are the most vulnerable geographical areas in the country? What are the local, regional, and international drivers of local manifestation of violent extremism? The next question is, what are the expressed needs for education on the prevention of violent extremism according to the all stakeholders groups, including those most at risk and former members of violent extremist groups? Who and which organizations are already undertaking work in this field? Are there any lessons learned on their impact? These questions and others along the same lines will help the education sectors judge the relevance of the issues to the country context. And situational analysis need to be conducted with the involvement of both professional researchers and voice of population or groups considered at risk, as well as concerned communities. Mobilizing a large variety of viewpoints and a broad base of national and international information for this exercise reduce the risk of overlooking relevant knowledge about the factors contributing potentially to violent extremism and their possible remedies. The next uh, approach is sector-wide approach. Uh, some countries have chosen to engage in sector-wide initiative to set international priorities and secure institutional commitment to prevent preventing violent extremism. These approaches include the development of national prevention of violent extremism plans or strategies that includes education components. Sector-wide approaches can also consist of establishing central coordination units for the prevention of violent extremism within the Ministry of Education or higher education. In some country, it differs. So in some country, it maybe include the Ministry of Culture as well. These arrangements can be helpful to ensure that prevention measures are benefiting from the know-how of all education stakeholders and supporting ongoing efforts to increase the relevance of education. Corollary is to create network of focal point for the prevention of violent extremism throughout the education system. Example of activities are like development of multi-sectoral national plans for the prevention of violent extremism and policy reviews. The next example is establishment of central coordination units for the prevention of violent extremism within ministries of education and higher education, and also creation of a focal point system at school and district levels and or throughout government to ensure the coordination of education related interventions. And another example is about the development of monitoring and evaluation metrics to measure progress in prevention and support. The next approach will be curriculum-based approach. Curriculum documents play a key role in shaping learners' understanding of themselves and the world around them. Curricular approach to the prevention of violent extremism should focus on ensuring that the intended and taught curricula are inclusive and developed the following key learner so I will mention the key learner attributes that are the heart of global citizenship education, which is conducted by the UNESCO. Number one is informed and critically literate. Number two is socially connected and respectful of diversity. Number three is ethically responsible and engaged. These skills can be developed through traditional subjects like civic education, history, literature, physical education, sports, social studies, and etc., or through cross-cultural projects and assignments. The latter encourage learners to work across disciplines and create opportunities to take part in learning by doing. As the GETI also have conducted an online introduction about this as well some days before, about the learning by doing. The overall relevance of curricula can also be enhanced by ensuring that content is linked to current issues of concern to learners, be they personal, local, regional, or global. The process of curricular development and implementation will also be enriched if practitioners are actively engaged. If the views of each stakeholder group are sought and recognized during the curriculum development process, there is a greater chance that the curriculum itself will be effectively thought and viewed as inclusive, and that it will meet the needs of the diverse range of students it seeks to serve. School principals and teachers should be regarded as particularly important stakeholders. Their participation significantly increases their commitment to the realization of the curriculum in the school and classrooms. I have listed some examples of the activities regarding to the curriculum-based approaches, and those examples are introduction of dedicated content through standalone subjects, focusing, for example, on well-being, school life, world religions, global citizenship, and etc. The next example is of the cross-cultural approaches that promote interdisciplinary studies and project-based learning. The next example is about the mainstreaming content and topics throughout the curriculum, notably in key career subjects such as history, civic and citizenship education, and philosophy and social studies. The next approach to fight violent extremism through education is about the teacher training and support. The successful implementation of prevention efforts through education systems depends on the capacities of educators, teachers, and the school staff. They are interfacing directly with the students and their families and are therefore on the front lines of prevention. Considering that violent extremism is related to complex issues, possibly linked to socioeconomic, cultural, religious, or ethnic tensions and conflict, not all teachers feel confident to address the matter head. Teachers can also themselves be condoning diversity stereotypes and ill prepared to question their assumptions. If teachers do not feel emotionally or professionally ready to do so, they should not engage in conversations on violent extremism and subjects that generate tensions. The success of prevention efforts hinges upon teachers' capacity to understand and manage their own biases. It is therefore paramount that teachers and educators at large be made aware of the message that they convey, like internationally or in the classroom. Sometimes this message can be intentionally and maybe unintentionally. These can be done through targeted and adapted capacity building activities, including peer-to-peer exchanges with school staff and educators operating out of the formal education system. Topics to be explored include drivers of violent extremism, pathways to radicalization leading to violent extremism, the role of education and teachers in particular in prevention, teachers, individual attitudes about the violence, discussing contentious issues in the classroom, mm, policy and practice for teaching about religious and non-religious worldviews through intercultural cultural education, conflict resolution and mediation, inclusive teaching approaches, etc. When a school,
Mr. Hamid, we are running short of time. So if you can sum up quickly the points, it will be better.
sure, I will go just quick with the approaches. The examples of activities that should be taken for the teacher training in sport is uh, about the pre and in-service training on violent extremism. It causes drivers and manifestations, pedagogical approach to prevention, teachers' role in the prevention. The next one is about the psychological support for teachers impacted by violent extremism. The next approach is about the whole school approach and intervention. So school-based approaches are particularly effective to reach out of the to learners and provide holistic responses to concerns of rising violent extremism. Schools as microorganisms of society can provide opportunities for students to apply critical thinking and civic education lessons in real life settings. They also provide a framework to experience volunteer opportunities or to initiate community service projects that can be transformational. And the examples for this approach are about the school assemblies addressing the issue of violent extremism, open discussion on contentious issues. The next example is about the development of anti-bullying policies and codes of conduct through participatory process involving students, teachers, school personnel, and families. The next example is about the student welfare and well-being services, including guidance and counseling services, and also youth-driven projects that support international, intercultural dialogues and inclusive school climates. The next example will be about the invention of great guest speakers to discuss issues with students and parents. Law enforcement officers, former violent extremism, media or internet professionals, and etc. I think we are going to get run of time. Miss Shilpi, hello.
Yes, I mean, we have just 5 minutes. If you can sum up without the slides, can you do it? I mean, can you just sum up
Yeah,
the points? Yeah. Yeah.
sure. Uh, the next approach is also we have to prevent violent extremism through education. Is about non-formal education and community-based approaches. In these approaches, the arts and sports in education programs like community information and exchange, town hall meetings, and e-learning platforms, supports to youth groups, youth drop in centers, providing guidance and counseling, family awareness programs, non-formal education programs for mothers, workplace-based training, and awareness raising on diversity management should be taken in consideration. And the last approaches that we are going to talk about is about the intersectoral partnership. It cannot be sufficiently emphasized that partnerships are the cornerstone of the effective prevention efforts targeting violent extremism. Schools and education systems generally cannot address and mitigate alone the full range of drivers of violent extremism, nor can they effectively support learners at risk and their families without collaborating with other sectors of society, including justice, health, and social protection services. Communities affected by the threat of violent extremism, like Afghanistan, through their activities and in collaboration with concerned professionals in and out of school, play a vital role in prevention as they build community cohesion and resilience to violent extremism. The examples of such kind of approaches are like regular coordination meeting at municipal level involving community leaders from all religious and non-religious groups and all concerned stakeholders like social and health workers, like law enforcement agents and business communities. The next example will be about the development of referral procedures with and for community leaders and educators. And the last example will be about the public information and education campaigns and cultural events, demonstrating the common resolve of all communities composing society to halt hate speech and violent extremism. These were we have more than these approaches to fight violent extremism, but just they are all about the education that I have talked about. I hope we have a world without extremism, especially without violence, and I hope to this information can help school managers as well how to fight violent extremism.
Thank you, Mr. Hamid. Yes, of course. I mean, I was listening to the entire thing, and you're very correct. I mean, if you just say education, but education also in a systematic pattern, if provided, then it will help to prevent this kind of violence. And would you like to talk a little about your Rahila Foundation? As to, just in the introduction, I did tell my viewers it's like in the memory of your sister. So, what is it all about? I mean, how is it helping, the people in general?
Sure. As the explosion happened in August 15, 2006, 2018, inside the classroom where Rahila was sitting in, and along Rahila, there were more than 100 students inside the classroom. Rahila and more than 50 other students lost their lives. So, um, then we have inspired by the Rahila's diary. It was written that education is the only solution to the current crisis of Afghanistan. It was really true. Based on this inspiration, we have decided to make a library or establish a library by the name of Rahila Library. And after that, Rahila Library changed to Rahila Foundation. And under the Rahila Foundation, we have three services, main services. The number one services is the library service. We provide free books to students. Like many of these students cannot buy books from they are poor and they are needy in the community, and we provide them free books. We provide them free space to study. And the next services that we provide for the students through the Rahla Foundation is about the Rahla Scholarship. Through the Rahila scholarship, we have provided yet more than 100 scholarship, local scholarship for the poor and needy students. So now there are more than 100 students fulfilling their dreams and going to take part in educational centers, like studying English courses, computer courses, like studying
Mhm.
uh, science and medical subjects. And the other programs are the we are conducting through the Rahla Foundation is about the capacity building trainings. Through the Rahla Foundation, we have yet trained more than 3,000 people for the last 2 years. And we are conducting many different subjects like leadership, like management, moreover, we are conducting the training on the personal skills and soft skills to promote young people through their training, through our training. And actually, these trainings have been benefited most of them. And now, those people who have benefited from our programs, kind of, I can say that we are also making a group of people who fight extremism and violent extremism by educating them, actually. So that was I have decided to talk about violent extremism and fighting violent extremism through education. I hope this can benefit people as well. If we consider this at school level, especially about the teachers, about the students, or if we talk about these things inside the classroom, or if we bring some changes on the curricula at school level and university level, of course, the next generation is they will combat education, but then violent extremism.
Yes, Mr. Hamid, you're very correct that education is actually taking people away from darkness towards light. So thank you so much for sparing time. I know you are living in a very difficult situation, as we were discussing offline. That life where you are living is not an easy one, and we know people there live under the fear each and every day of their lives. So we here pray that as soon as possible there should be peace and harmony. And yes, people should be able to, especially youngsters who have still a big life to live, they should have the freedom to study and to fulfill their dreams. I mean, the kind of situation that you've told me is there in Kabul, it's so difficult for them, even for children. I mean, they must be living under a lot of fear. And so if you have fear in your mind, you cannot be free to fulfill your aims and ambitions. So thank you for getting in touch with us. We will spread this message of peace and love, and I hope all the viewers who are watching us will get in touch with Rahila Foundation and take benefits from your organization as well. Thank you, Mr. Hamid, once again.
Thank you, Michelle P, for organizing this beautiful session, and thank you everyone for being with us.
Our pleasure.